Good morning again. I'm Lori Gates Addison with Cumberland Mountain Community Services, and I'm the Director of Child and Family Services, and welcome to our ACE trauma training today. And what we're doing right now is we're giving out folks the actual ACE score checklist. And what I want people to do is to take this test for yourself. Just don't overthink it. If something happened to you one time, that counts. So just check the score, tuck it away somewhere. Don't overthink it. Just do an honest. You're welcome. Does everyone have one? Great. Thank you. You're welcome. She texted me about 10 minutes outside of Aslan. Yeah. I don't know if people just have your phone and your phone. Gosh, I don't even know how do you, I guess with a mouse you can click on video. I know it's plugging in this. I've got it pulled up just in case. Yeah. And don't second guess yourself like, well, that happened, but it's not so bad. Or if you have a memory, if that triggers something, go ahead and just give yourself a point. Who was here for mental health first aid? Raise your hand. Great. Oh, hi, everyone. It's hard to tell with masks what people look like, unless I know you. So look up when you're done. I'm not rushing you. I just want to make sure you're listening. Okay, great. So ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so this morning, when I start, I'm going to talk a little bit in general about what this means and why is it important for us to understand what ACE means. And as communities on a large scale, on a public health model, why is that important to think about? And so as we begin to think about it, I want you to know that your memories are stored in your body. And that's from birth. The minute we're born, we begin to generate memories. Our brain is a functioning element, and we begin to solidify who we are as people and how we are as functioning human beings. And I want people to think about just the fact when you bring a baby home, what are we doing? You know, we're putting it in blue, we're putting it in pink, we're talking to it, we're creating an atmosphere, we're soothing ourselves, we're soothing that child, we're setting that child up from day one with the experience in life. So it's about you and me and changing the future of public health. It's about discovering a common language that if I trained you all, if I trained your churches, your communities, everyone, we would be on the same playing field to understand developmentally why ACE is important. Last week we talked to you about mental health first aid, and I'm sure a lot of you all thought about yourself or people that you know and how they're functioning, how they're feeling, and why mental health is so important. And adverse childhood experiences not only encompasses how we're feeling, but remember your noticing skills as far as thinking, behaviors, and emotions. Sometimes there's things we can see and sometimes there's things we can't see. But I want you to recognize the fact that your physiology as it's growing with your emotional health is really important, and it hard sets itself, and we're going to learn that. You're fine. I need the next slide, so I don't know where I'm going. So let's talk some about the early studies. Adverse childhood experiences was really, this concept was developed by these two gentlemen, Folletti and Ande, and what they discovered was that early adversity increases physical, mental, behavioral problems later on in life. And that's huge. If you were to understand all of us as physical beings, you would know that who we are was developed early on, and it was solidified in our brain. No, you're fine. And so they did a study of over 17,000 people, and they had them all look at these areas that you all just looked at, and they checked. They all came up with an ACE score. And as the study went on and they tracked these people for a long time, they were able to find out that there was evidence that showed that early life experiences increases later on difficulties. The more you're exposed to these adverse childhood experiences, the more you are to have health issues or mental health issues later on in life, whether you want it to affect you or not. These things are going on because of the experiences your brain has. So the nervous system orchestrates, of course, functions and perspectives that we all have. Neuroscience, understanding this education that you're going to get today will change your life, because you'll realize there's things going on that you can't help that might trigger how you feel later on in life, the kinds of health issues that you have, and more importantly, the behavioral and mental health issues that you may experience. So the human nervous system, of course, deals with the brain. We talk about that all the time. And where's your second brain? Do you remember? Your stomach. That's right, because all these things are interconnected. And I hope this week you thought a lot about things when you're eating, or choices that you're making and things that are going on, or when you're feeling anxious in your stomach, that's also affecting your brain, your nervous system. But we have our spinal cord, and we have peripheral nerves that come from the brain. We have single nerves. All of these things develop and work together. And what's curiously interesting about childhood, and this is so important, is that at birth, this is what our synaptic density looks like. It's very basic, bare bones when you're a child. So what's that tell you? It tells you that there's lots of room to grow and change, doesn't it? The world is at your feet. And what we see in early elementary school is these things fire rapidly. There's all kinds of opportunities to learn and to grow and to solidify a lot of things that make us who we are. How many of you all realize that when you have a child, by the time they're 5, if their speech hasn't been addressed, it becomes harder, doesn't it? So we knew that, I, for years, did all the mental health screenings in Head Start programs in Russell, Tazewell, and Buchanan. And it was about the time I had kids those age too. And man, it really opened my eyes and made me drill down on the fact that we really have to do a lot of early intervention, intervene, understand what's going on with children at a young age, because if we don't make a lot of changes before 5, it gets harder to do. And speech, to me, is always a good example. You have a child that's learning words a little differently and you can't understand them. When they get to be 5, it gets a little tougher. So kids who go unnoticed, and we don't see them till they're in the school system, what are we doing? We're providing them speech, but it's a little rougher to work on it. So as you move through developmentally with children in puberty, these new experiences and opportunities to learn kind of go away. So in puberty, those neurons stop firing as much. So you're kind of set in what you have. So in order to change, in order to adapt, becomes more difficult. So realizing that the brain has a huge piece in how we grow and learn. And this ACE study showed us that if things happen to us in these early years and we don't address them or we don't change them, it becomes much more difficult to do that, or we have to change our awareness about how to intervene and help with that, or you're going to have a lot of later adulthood issues as a result of not having those opportunities to grow and learn and change and nurture. So that awareness is really important, and it also enables us later on in the presentation. Cynthia will talk about, it enables us later on to understand how to communicate, how to intervene, and how to, more importantly, understand each other. And sometimes it helps us to develop a better approach on how we're going to help folks. And I will also say it helps folks be a little easier on themselves. Every time I do this presentation, and I shared a lot with you all, you know, one of my ACE scores is growing up with a mentally ill mom. Every time I do this training, you know, you're in here thinking I'm learning something to help children, and what you're doing is you're learning about yourself. And often just this presentation lifts the veil that many people have where they're harboring anxiety and past history and trauma, and they begin to dig a little deeper with themselves. And so again, it's not about we're trying to understand those people. We're trying to understand ourselves. And we're trying to help ourselves predict our future a little bit better and nurture ourselves and take care of ourselves. So awareness that your second brain is your stomach and how you treat your body and what you put in it and what you're exposed to environmentally, but who you're with, who nurtured you or didn't nurture you when you were a child, really affects who you are to this very day and as you age and get older. Doesn't mean we don't have opportunity to change. Of course we do, but it's really important to understand what happens during this time. Why is that? Why do we need to understand this? Because this study told us 17,000 people, and they weren't people, you know, necessarily those people in poverty. They weren't addicts. They weren't whatever. Most of them were white, middle-class folks. And this study pulled out so much information longitudinally as they followed these people about what happened to them and looked at their ACE score and what that was predicting and what that was saying about who they were and where they had been. So, you know, there's two different trains you can go on. You know, if at conception your life starts, I hope you can see this online, but at conception your life starts. And, you know, if you grow up in a situation where there was poverty, where there was a lot of stress and trauma going on, and, you know, you weren't nurtured and it wasn't a calm environment, you immediately went to that fight or flight, constantly on edge. You know, you might perceive that in childhood, your experience was a dangerous situation. You know, if you grow up where your parents are half in the bag, your mom's mentally ill, or you don't have food to eat. You have great parents, but maybe you don't have food to eat, and it was stressful, then you were in a dangerous situation, maybe, perception. So, you know, your adaptation to that might be fight, flight, or freeze. And these are just simple. We're going to go into them more, but you know, if you wake up in the morning to people screaming and yelling and fighting, or you're afraid your dad's going to leave, or it's scary, a child perceives anger as, oh, it's me, or there's difficult situation. I mean, you just don't know what their perception is. But fight, flight, and freeze is that adaptive behavior we have. I better calm down, I better be quiet, I better not be seen, or I'm anxious. My second brain is churning, and we know that that can cascade into all kinds of things, you know, with your cortisol, your digestive health, and then, you know, goodness knows when they get to be in kindergarten what you're dealing with, right? Is it really that they're over-the-top child, ADD child, or were they a child that lived in an extremely anxious environment, and when you're in your classroom and the teacher's talking really loud, sit down, their automatic thing might be fight or flight. It's not that you're a bad teacher, you know. It might be that that's just an automatic response that their hardwire taught them to do. The other thing is, as an adult functioning, you might end up really having great survival skills. You might be one of those people where you're like, well, hi, Mrs. So, if you're going to get on my kid today, let me just tell you what I'm doing. I'm taking you to my lawyer. They're really used to being in that fight or flight. That's their survival mode. That's automatic for them. Sometimes that's functional. We see a lot of people go into being a firefighter, and those skills help them in their job. But that gut health and that churning might mean that they have heart disease at an early age. They might be a really great firefighter, and they may never tell you what they went through as a child. And they may have been able to hide a whole lot because maybe they were the quiet one at home. But they still have those adaptive or dysfunctional type of automatic responses, right? Or you could grow up in a safe environment. You feel safe. Life is good. That was your childhood experience. People taught you how to process. You had a Brene Brown in your life that created vulnerability in the arena, and you learned to talk and know that the world is not always mountaintop experiences. The world sometimes can be valleys, and that's normal. And let's talk about how you deal with that, and you know where to go for help. You've learned to sit down. You don't automatically freak out when somebody talks loud, those kinds of things. Your gut's doing really well. You're nourished, all those risk factors you just read through. And then when you're an adult, you survive the best conditions, vulnerable in the worst situations. Does this start to make sense to you a little bit? Yeah, this idea of experience, childhood experience, it could be really good or it could be adverse, sets your adaptation ability. Your ability to adapt up. Is it going to be a survival adaptation later on in life because, this is the way you were raised and you may function well, but your health is going all the heck, right? So you can see these two things going on all the time. So adaptions versus expectations. When biology collides with social expectations, we run into trouble. And we're going to talk about this. Why is it when you tell some kids, sit down, be quiet, do your work, and I'm going to be authoritarian, and I'm going to be kind, but I'm an organized teacher or whatever, why are they not responding? Are they a bad child? Oh, well, her mother was like that. Some of that plays in, I'm sure. There's stigma. I challenge you to think about what we talked about last week. But there's that brain chemistry. There's that functioning at an early age that gets disrupted or dysregulated, and it cascades the rest of our life. Our adaptations become skewed. We can survive, but is it healthy for us? I don't know. Does it mess us up when we're trying to intervene with kids? It can. And I'm picking on kids because you all are in the educational system, but same thing with the adult addict. We want to shame and blame people for being an addict and all the terrible things that have happened in their life, but they've been homeless. They keep on going, but man, their body's all the heck, and not just from maybe the addiction and the damage on their body from the drug, but the emotional turmoil that they went through as a child set them up. Why do you need to know that? Why do we all need to know that? Why do I keep bringing up addiction? Because that's where we live in our community. And as a culture, we all have to be on the same page sometimes. We all have to operate from the same perspective, and many of you all in this room or over the airways may have operated from a lot of shame and guilt. Anybody check out Brene Brown? Oh, I should have made it homework, then you would have done it. You still need to look up Brene Brown on YouTube, the whole vulnerability thing, arena thing, okay? Because sometimes we shove that shame and that guilt, trauma down so far because we're trying so hard to be successful. Or maybe we're okay, but our husband isn't. Our wives aren't, but we're not going to acknowledge that. We're just going to keep plowing through. That's great. But there's all these other things that are going to start happening to your health, your environment. It's going to catch up with you. So it's important to recognize it. And more importantly, it's recognize it in children because there are things you can do. There are things you can accommodate to help their adaptation grow and change. Just like the child who's already got a speech deficit at 5, do we say, oh, well, they're going to talk bad forever? No, we try. So you can try with this too. So think about the effects of maltreatment, the type of maltreatment, the age that it happened. What's their ACE score? I was always fascinated to look at all the studies on the children in Romania. I've done some mission work in Estonia, Baltic areas, and I was fascinated to see, do you all remember in the 90s there was a whole influx of children from Romania, adoptions, things like that going on because of the travesty that part of the world experienced. And what we found out was there were so many kids in orphanages. And think about it. Think about this entire room being filled up with 100 babies. And lots of caring people. There might be as many of us in there taking care of them. But they're in rows. Visualize this. They're in rows and cribs, and in the morning everybody goes in there and they do their job and they go through and they make sure everybody's diaper gets changed through the aisles and they get it all done. Now we got to feed them. Somebody's coming behind with a bottle. Some's propping. Some's dealing. On and on. This goes on. These kids are clean. They look great. But they're not getting the nurturing, are they? They're hearing lots of crying and lots of very organized efforts to take care of them. And what they started noticing was some of these children, when they became able to crawl, walk, turn over developmentally, they were lagged. Some of them were doing a lot of rocking, a lot of self-stimming, those types of things, because they weren't getting the nurturing. Maybe they weren't being abused physically, but they were being neglected, and not on purpose. These folks were doing the best they can trying to adopt these children out. And suddenly was born a lot of research on attachment disorders. How many are familiar with attachment disorders? Yeah, so that's that child that just doesn't know how to connect to you. There's not that need to need you. They become survivalists. They become integrated. So what we saw was some of these kids were getting adopted at 5 into teenagers, and they just had no connection to people. They might even have the fight or flight, react behaviorally, and then you just couldn't connect to them emotionally. Well, they're just, personality disorder. They're choosing not to listen to me. But what do we know about attachment disorder? There was a lack of bonding, social connectedness, emotional connectedness, and not on purpose. So lots of studies in all different areas started coming out. But with the ACE study, they were able to notice that 17,000 people, middle class, Caucasian people, were experiencing health difficulties. And when they drilled down on it, they started seeing ACE scores. And the average ACE score of 4 is when it becomes notable. If you have an ACE score of 4 or more, you went through some stress as a child. And that's notable, and you'll see that. So, again, adaptation, cause and effect, things, that are occurring in the brain with your synapses that need to grow and nurture and whatever. Enables you to go on and have great relationships and to be involved with people, and you grow up to be healthy. Let's look at the limbic system, first. And you can see the area in the middle of the brain where this is located. And this is our fight or flight region. And of course, these are the things that it's vital for. Learning, memory, reward, reinforcement, hormones, mood, heartbeat, sexual behavior are all the things that it regulates. So if you have things going on in your early childhood, These things are going to be areas that you're going to have difficulty with possibly as you get older. It's just naturally occurring. That's what's going on in your brain at that time. And the synapses, those little neuron firings, drop in puberty. So if this is going on in early childhood, you can imagine what it looks like or manifests later on in life. The amygdala and the hippocampus area, of course, is a little bit lower. And of course, this is vital for relationships. Panic, fear, attention, memory, social cues. If you are not nurtured, if you're living in a less than adequate environment nutritionally, just from poverty, that's going to affect who you are. If you're eating processed canned, heat 'em up, eat 'em up food, some, not saying school food's bad, but it's the best you can do. But, we're talking malnourishment and that cascade later on. But this area is important for relationships. So maltreatment in the early years from 0 to 3, or sexual abuse, ages 0 to 5, what they saw in the ACE study, this is affecting these areas. If that sense of trust or violation or pain occurs because of maltreatment or abuse or neglect, sexual abuse, there are natural things that occur. There are disruptions or physical harm that occurs to children during sexual abuse, but the shame and the guilt on that level is also solidified. Those things stay with children, like it or not. I don't care if you're taken from a terrible home and you're put in a foster home. Those things are there. They need to be recognized. They don't need to be suppressed and moved on, and they need to be dealt with, even if it's at your age now. That awareness is so important. Sometimes people just hearing this, I've had people in trainings cry because I made it okay. I validated all that turmoil they've been hiding and running from and adapting to, and in secrecy are ashamed to tell. Can you imagine if you're 5 or 6 and you don't know to tell it? And what's happening in the classroom is more shame and guilt and doubt, and you're reacting the way that a child reacts. And most kids who are sad don't look sad. Maybe they're hitting, kicking. We're going to talk about that later. But start thinking about these connections. Positive feelings, perception, and attention, addiction, attention problems, and mental illness. The cerebellum vermis is where these things are occurring during the brain at this time, and all those neurotransmitters firing or not firing. So if you're having difficulty feeling positive as a child, feeling good in your environment, feeling safe, your perception is altered. You learn to shut down and be quiet real quick because someone's yelling at you, or there's stress and trauma, or maybe someone's cooking meth in your house and the priority is not to talk to you and is to tell you to go sit in the corner, or you're in a playpen the first couple years of your life. Sometimes we think we can get away with a lot with children, right? They won't remember. I can often say to people, and we say this a lot in our treatment program, and now that I'm saying it out loud, it makes me think a little bit, but I'll say, how much do you remember when you were 5? If we can turn these kids around and communicate to them, and we're going to talk about how to do that, then maybe 6 months or a year from now, we can get them on the good path and they won't remember a lot of this. But there's ways to do that. Once you acknowledge what they've been through, there's a way you've got to communicate based upon what damage has happened in their brain. And it may not be structure and organization, and we're going to talk about upper and lower brain in a little bit, and how to think about that when you're communicating. The corpus callosum, of course, is the left hemisphere of your brain. A lot of y'all know about this. Math and processing and routine. We'll say, how many are left and right brain people? And of course, the right hemisphere is more the visual, auditory processing, artistic, those kinds of things in that side of the brain. And I'm just touching on it because we're going to dive a little deeper here in a minute. So neglect in infancy, sexual abuse from ages 9 to 12. Remember, at birth, this is what your synapse looks like, your neurotransmitters. Kind of loose. There's a lot of ability to grow. And then in elementary age, they're firing, they're learning. So you can imagine abuse happening in elementary school really digs down on making you who you are. And then when you get to puberty, it's done. Are you adapting and learning in this part of your brain or adapting and learning in this part of your brain? And I'm going to keep saying that, and we're going to get more specific a little bit later. So, you know what? Together we have a collective choice. And I have to say, I love doing therapy, but my real love is public prevention. I believe there's so much power collectively in all of us to speak the same language, to have a set of empathy skills, and we can agree to disagree, but again, can we all be in that arena together and try to look at some of these and acknowledge some of these things, to not only let these children grow and thrive, but to let you grow and thrive, to let you have more empathy and compassion maybe for yourself and what you've been through, and more empathy and compassion for the other adults that we consume our time and our world with in our community. And I always talk about the drug epidemic because it's had such a rippling effect on us. It's just so important that we all speak the same language, and I'm really thankful for Melinda wanting to have these types of trainings. It's important. So, does bullying really matter in school? Think about it. If these are the kinds of things that kids, their brain is working on at that age, is it important that we deal with bullying? Does that trauma not only matter at home, but matter in the community and school setting too? Because they're still growing, it's still firing, and it's the most important time. So, of course, bullying is important to deal with. So, trauma-informed school discipline, is that important? Well, of course it is. And we're going to talk more about that later on, but I just want to pop that in here. Is it important to kind of wait a day, wait an hour, wait till they're ready to talk? Are you going to make sense to a 2-year-old in the middle of a tantrum? You can talk your head off, can't you? Well, it's no different when you deal with a kid who's been traumatized and their ability to be nurtured, to grow, to learn got shut down and they're stuck there. They're the same. And when you see a tantrum and desk throwing and all those things going on in the elementary years, you're not going to gain a lot of mileage by talking on this level. You got to understand them here. And they've got to calm down. And does that mean you wait a day? Does that mean you wait an hour? So it's important to think about. So again, the ACE study looked at all this with a large group of adults, looked at their mental health, looked at their physical health, looked at their ACE score. Boy, they found some interesting stuff. We know that understanding health behaviors as far as adaptations and adversity, we know that a kid who's maltreated, has anger issues, behavioral problems, probably will grow up to smoke. That's what we know in this research. Does the risk for chronic health problems originate in childhood? What would be the answer now? Give me an answer, yes or no? Yeah, of course. So let's think about it. If we look at the, I don't know why that little thing is showing up, but anyway, if you look at this, the foundation of who we are, the historical trauma, the intergenerational adversity that we live through, and trauma of those ACE scores, that's the foundation. Adverse childhood experiences, layers on top of that. So you have your genetic makeup, the history of your family, you have your childhood experiences that you see on your sheet, and then you have social, emotional, and your cognitive function gets layered on that. That's a direct result of those two bottom areas. And then, of course, health and risk behaviors are going to be completely correlated to all of that. And then we have disease, disability, and social problems and early death. It's all interrelated. And it's as simple as thinking about having the awareness that your second brain is your stomach, things that you put in, how you're feeling. You can feel it there when you're upset. All those connections start at childbirth. So finding more connections, how multiple forms of childhood adversity can affect many important public health problems. Having this awareness is so important because The little things that you do now make such a big difference later on. And they're really illustrated in the concept of risk and protective factors. Whenever I write grants or look at our community, I do these huge needs assessments. I look at some of the highest risk factors in our community to understand really what might be going on with children so that I can give clues or help about the type of protective factor activities or areas we can think about when we're developing programs, organizing evidence-based things that say if you have, for example, our highest risk factors in this part in Tazewell County would be, what do you think? What are the highest community risk factors we have that affect Tazewell County? Yes, drug addiction, huge. What else? What, honey? Yes. Yes. Poverty, drug addiction, grandparents raising children, anything else? Nailed it. Highest risk factors are history of family substance abuse, which of course relates to, if you drill down on that, would be grandparents raising grandchildren. You would want to look at what types of drugs, and the types of drugs tell us about the type of interventions we would do. Right now, our drugs of choice continue to be opioids and methamphetamine. We drilled down on distribution, so methamphetamine is a replacement drug. Heroin came in a little bit, but it's harder to get. Geographically, where are we at? How do things get in and out of here? I mean, I could go on about that all day long. Poverty, that has been, something that's been affecting Appalachia for years. And when you look at poverty and the need to have money, that's why we had a lot of elderly people early on in the drug addiction selling their prescription for $1 for $2,000. So the economic deprivation was driving the drug problem. And then as time goes on and people were dying, going to jail, grandparents had to raise grandkids, and there's all kinds of things that you can draw from that about how that affects the community, how that affects the school system, how that affects kids' learning. But then if you were just to look at public health stuff, what was that child going through? What kind of food were they eating or not eating? So there, you begin to understand that. So public health is important. Those are our risk factors, and by understanding our risk factors, we can begin to think about protective factors. And that's where you get into school programming that looks at bullying, that looks at ALS, PALS, a lot of the science-based curriculums that we've tried to do over the years, because we're trying to empower teachers. And the school climate in a rural area, that's where you're going to get to kids. So now we can only imagine the season of COVID, what we're dealing with. Are kids getting food like they need it? Kids who maybe are in stressful home situations had a break during the day. They're not getting that break. We've seen some suicides among young people, and it breaks my heart. So COVID's going to encourage us to think about things a little bit differently. Number one, how important it is for children to be at school, to be with their friends. I wanted to be with my friends in high school more than I wanted to be with my parents. I think we all do. And when you take that out, it's important. So on a public health model, understanding ACEs is so important. It really takes away the burden. And I, again, can say this, living with an educator all these years, it takes the burden and blame away from you feeling like you're a terrible teacher if you understand maybe a little bit more about or a counselor or a nurse, a little bit more about really what's going on. Is it that I'm a lousy teacher? No, I need to look at my community. I need to look at my community, and I need to look at my kids' ACE scores and wrap my head around the risk and protective factors. Am I nurturing enough protective factors in my classroom, in my school, in my counseling curriculum? When I walk in and assess a child as a nurse, am I considering their ACE score, or am I just looking at their temperature? These are things that you need to challenge yourself, not to become a better interventionist, but to give yourself a break and realize it's not all on you to fix it right away. It's all on you to create and to understand, or to create an understanding for yourself and the community that you're in, whether it's literally your church And what you're doing maybe in recovery programs or to help people, or it's in your classroom, or it's politically or administratively in your school system, which is why this training is here today. So in this study, let's look at what they found. People with an ACE score of about 5, 20%, 7% of them had substance abuse. 23% of them grew up in a home with a parental situation, separation, divorce. 70% of them had a mental illness, had a parent with a battered mother, and there was criminal behavior going on. In the neglect situation, you can just kind of see how this ACE score is correlating with what they're talking about. These are the things that people had when they had 5, 2, and 3 of an ACE score. ACEs are highly interrelated. Where one ACE occurs, there are usually others. So they overlap. That's not uncommon. If that's my phone, you can silence it, sorry. So ACE scores reliably predict challenges during the life course. So what they're saying, what I said earlier is, if you have an average ACE score of 4 or more, if you checked 4 or more things out of 10, then you're 16% more likely to have challenges in adult life. And it may be emotional, but it may be physical, it may be health related. And this is where you can see if you have 1 ACE score all the way up to 5, how that just continues to increase. And this is all from those people in this study. ACEs, smoking and lung disease, for example, you can see the early folks with an ACE score of 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can see the darkest color is 4. They had started smoking early. They're current smokers now, and that's how many of them have COPD. And that's people with an ACE score, and it could be anything on the ACE score. That's just an example. So anxiety, depression, difficulty concentrating, and smoking. Remember in mental health first aid, I said the true or false test was people with a chronic or long-term mental illness are typically smokers. It's a stress thing, right? What's the story of your life? And think about that. That's that child again. Midlife they're smoking, then later on they're having anxiety, stress, heart disease. ACEs and depression, same thing, men and women. If you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the bottom, women, of course, are higher with depression, but men too, it increases. Depression increases. The more higher your ACE score, the higher likelihood that you'll have some depression. And suicide, look at that. That's huge. So think about COVID season, being locked down and depression, and we're seeing it. Neurobiology and epidemiology converge. I feel like, is this the PowerPoint that is on the stick? All right. The mean number of co-occurring outcomes, and just what this means is the higher your ACE score, the more you have co-occurring things like, if you're anxious or tore up, you're probably going to drink, and that's going to lead to liver disease. It's a cascade effect. And again, alcoholism and alcohol abuse can lead to liver disease, coronary heart, can lead to obesity. So you can see intimate partner violence leads to workplace problem or violence. It's amazing. This study pulled out a lot of information, and this is all related to that. So again, think about what happens to you as a child, what kind of adaptations you learned as a result, shut down, fight or flight, your cognition, your attention, your behavior, what was that like? And then that led to academic failure, early substance abuse, being kicked out of school, and then later on, low-wage job, worker injury, chronic health problems, homelessness. So again, that foundation of genetic predisposition, historical family composition, all those adverse childhood experiences in the cascade. So ACEs are common. I want you to know that. People have you may not know it, and you may be somebody suffering from a high ACE score, or at least 4, and you're functional and you're great. But maybe someone needed to give you permission to let the anxiety and the perfectionism go because of what you grew up in. You know, or maybe you're not an addict, but you married one because that was normal for you, and it's created a lot of difficulty in your adult life. Now you might understand why that was easy to roll into that situation. The stress is real, the struggle's real, and I want you to know I understand that. So increased risk of multiple health problems, social problems as a reminder, and intergenerational transmission of ACEs. If you grew up in a home, and I'm thinking of 2 clients we're working with right now, and people are screaming and yelling at you and using drugs, guess what's easy to happen to you? It will be normal to smoke. It might be easy to pick up a drug. Biologically, we know you're predestined to probably become addicted a lot faster. And if yelling was the mode of problem solving, guess what you're doing as an adult with your children? It's understandable, right? Maybe no one told you that before. And we do that a lot with families when we see them. You know, the excuse is your kid, we're here with you, but our job is to connect with them, to let them know that we understand their struggle is real. How can we help you? This must have been hard for you as a child too. Maybe no one's ever said that to them before. Common cause, everyone can contribute. Everyone can contribute to the accumulation of ACEs. Be aware of that. If you are a yeller, authoritative style classroom teacher and you have a child with a high ACE score, you may be compiling the trauma, not on purpose. But it's important to be aware of that. You've got to discover where they're operating from in their brain, top or bottom, and we're going to talk about that. It's really teamwork. And that's why we're here. I'm trying to give you permission to understand it for yourself, for your children, and for your community, because it might open your eyes to a different avenue of helping, of intervening. I'm hoping I'm giving you a break to yourself and to challenge you to think of a new way. So, nurturing the healthy development of these protective systems or opportunities, protective factors in our community, affords the most important preparation or inoculation for overcoming potential threats and adversities in human development. Similarly, damage or destruction of these systems has dire consequences for positive adaptive capacity of individuals. So you need to look at a child's capabilities and nurture it, understand their attachment and belonging ability or process or awareness, and community cultural spiritually. So I told you about my story and my mom. Remember I talked about my granola neighbor where I would babysit for an hour every day after school, and then I had this great teacher that let me stay after, and I helped her decorate her classroom and grade her papers from 4th grade to 6th grade. That choir director that made me feel like the best thing since sliced bread, and I still sing to this day and get on stage. She and they nurtured, and a youth pastor and an advisor at college, they all nurtured protective factors in me to where sometimes I didn't realize, it wasn't until later in life that I really was able to acknowledge and understand the stress and the ACE situation that I was growing up in. And so those protective factors are so important, and maybe that's why I'm so dedicated to doing Mountain Youth Drama or programs in the community for young people where they have an opportunity to be around an adult that they can count on every Wednesday night to create that vulnerability, that environment, that arena, because that nurtures protective factors. That helps them adapt, and I give them the time and the space to catch up, because that damage has already been done, and they might not get it as fast. And so it takes time. So looking at individual capabilities, looking at that child, understanding their ACE score, and then nurturing their adaptive abilities and capabilities. Positive view lets me know I'm important and valuable. I can sing. I can cut out letters and put them on your board. Jesus loves me. I can just think of all these things that people empowered me with. And you can do that too. Attachment and belonging. Relationships with caring and competent people are vital contributors to resilience and recovery. It's never too late. Understanding that core foundation is so important, and it gives me the exuberance to keep going, to know that it's never too late to build resilience and recovery in people. So professional support and those pills real quick are important, but also encourage what? What was the fourth thing in the algae? Encourage peer support, recovery, remember? That's just as important as going and getting that pill, getting counseling for 6 weeks. Encouraging people to be involved in youth groups, mentoring programs, sports activities, arts activities, a good neighbor, youth program. So community, faith, and cultural, that's so important. What's our stronghold here? Family. Like I always said, you see people piled up on the front porch no matter how far you go back in Appalachia. But what else is a stronghold in Southwest Virginia or the South? What? Faith, church. Mountain Movers is real strong in Tazewell County. It's a faith-based coalition, Mountain Movers, Buchanan County chapter. It's on Facebook. At least like this stuff. Look at the free training and be aware of what's going on. The ASAC Coalition on Facebook. StopSubstanceAbuse.com. Maybe you don't need it, okay, but maybe someone you work with will. Maybe an adult that you're trying to connect to will value those resources. And culturally, take advantage of these recovery programs, especially after COVID. It's not just substance abuse, it's mental health as well. So to foster a thriving community, understand our culture. And man, we got it going on when it comes to faith community, right? And we know how to feed people in Southwest Virginia. So anytime there's an activity or an event, there's some good food, and family. So whether that family is grandparents or understanding they don't have their mom anymore, encourage the mentoring things that we can do. So again, community capacity development is expand your leadership in your community. The school's trying to, provide these opportunities to encourage you to expand your professional knowledge, to increase your personal empathy and capacity to understand things like mental health first aid and ACE, Narcan coming today, coming together as a community. And you know what? Maybe you don't have a problem, but maybe you have a strength that you can share. Do you realize that everybody in this room would volunteer 1 hour a week doing something you love? We would have a better world. Mountain Youth Drama is not a bunch of destitute kids. They're great kids wanting to come and make a difference and put on a show, but they're relying on me to be there every week and love on them and to be positive and create that arena of vulnerability that they can talk and be themselves, and before they know it, they just really care about each other. They have a great support group. Oh yeah, and we got to put a show on. But you could start a weekly writing group where you encourage kids to go out and ask stories to their grandparents and their family and friends about stories from Southwest Virginia. At the end of the year, you print a little book. But the real reason that you did this is you want them to come together once a week for an hour, and you nurture their vulnerability and their ability to talk and get along and have good peer relationships and an adult mentor. Oh yeah, and we can publish a book. That's the excuse. The experience is the real jewel in the effort. So what do you love to do? Are you volunteering? Are you doing something? Coaching, Girl Scouts, all those little things that we can do. There's how many of us doing this training times 1 hour a week in your community? Shared learning. Anytime we can come together and have conversations like this in an open, honest way is, of course, positive. And let's look at our results. After you do this ACE training, are you going to be able to communicate better with each other? Maybe some of you are going to be more comfortable in talking about ACE today when we leave than others, if you see that in yourself, then take it on. Hey, let's kind of, I know we've got this kid, but wonder what the ACE situation is. We know mom's a substance. We know there's been some abuse. We know they don't have a lot of money. And we know their parents are, she's got a 4 already. So what do you know about a 4? It could be 5, 6, 7, 8. So start communicating and thinking. And when we tell you some of these techniques to think about, you'll feel better equipped. Leadership expansion. Who takes the leadership in your school? How many of you all have heard about the movie Paper Tigers? Did you find that one? Oh, all right. Okay. Yeah, okay. There's a movie called Paper Tigers, and I had the ultimate privilege of being trained by the principal of this school. He had an ACE training. He got trained in trauma-informed approaches. He became a principal. His first day at school, he goes in, and he's like, well, hello, it's nice to meet you all. Hi, Mr. So-and-so. We've got 4 kids that need to come in. They need to talk to you, and so-and-so. He's tearing apart the vocational school, and he's like, well, it's nice to meet you, too. And he said when he walked down the hallway that morning, he's like, good morning. This one kid said, F you. And he's like, oh, my gosh. And he walked down the hall, and this other kid's like, whatever, get out of my face. And they totally disrespected him. He's a new principal. They didn't even know it, using the F-bomb, all these things. Then he walks into the office. The teacher's like, hi, it's nice to meet you. It's great. Okay. And they're doing all this stuff because it was a new secretary. So he's in his office, and he's trying to wrap his mind around the frustration of the first 10 minutes of the morning. All these kids were at school early. He'd never been to a school with kids there early. And so this boy comes in, and he's complaining. He sits down. You don't know what you're, whatever. Yeah, the last principal, he stayed 6 months. Talking. Then all of a sudden, he's getting mad. He's getting angry. And the guy's sitting there, and he's glazed over, and he's thinking, I have to love this kid. I just had this training. I have to love this kid. I just had this training. And he goes, I didn't address anything that he said or any of the way that he had treated me or how he had destroyed the classroom at the vocational school. I just said, buddy, I'm sorry you're having a bad morning. Well, I am. And he goes, well, what else is going on? What's really going on? I can tell you look sad. I'm so sorry. Today's my birthday. My dad said he was going to come over. He was going to visit me and said he was going to get me a car like 6 months ago. And I woke up this morning and there's no car in the driveway. And he hasn't called me. My dad's always let me down. Wow. My dad wasn't around a lot too when I was younger. I'm so sorry. He took that tantrum and he tried to calm him down. And after he calmed down, he said, I'll tell you what. Why don't you just get used to coming and talking to me in the morning for about 10 minutes and let's have some coffee together and for the next week or whatever and just kind of work through this if you don't mind. And I'm really sorry about your birthday, but I want to be the first one to tell you happy birthday. He goes, well, thanks. And he goes, and I have to tell you, I can't let you destroy the vocational school like this, but what I can do is ask you to go back and apologize to your teacher if you don't mind. But you need to come here every morning for the rest of the week and let's have 10 minutes in the morning together. Well, he said at the end of the school day, this teacher comes barging in his office and he's like, well, that boy, he destroyed my classroom. And he goes, yes, I know. It was terrible. And he's been doing this for 2 years now. And I've been telling his mom we're going to have to suspend him if he doesn't whatever. And he goes, and what'd you do to that kid to tell me he was sorry? Because he's never been that nice to me ever. And he goes, well, did you know? And he goes, yeah, he told me. It's his birthday and whatever. That was the beginning of his trauma-informed school. That school now, there's a movie. It's called Paper Tigers. Look it up. Watch it. They have a health clinic in their school. They have a coalition that they work with. It's an amazing movie. It's a true story. I love this man. So, again, share things. Make results-oriented decisions. Look at what you're doing. Has it made a change? Is our attitude and what we're doing in our classrooms working? And if they're not, how do we keep training and talking about ACE scores and vulnerability and those kinds of things? So where are you going to lead us in your community? Those are things that you need to think about. It can't just be here. It might be in your home. It might be at your church, not just here at school. And again, I want you to think about Stop Substance Abuse and the ASAC Coalition and the resources there. Make sure that you have those. And coming together really for all of us and being able to agree and disagree and be vulnerable together is what it's all about. And knowing that you're not alone, there's people like us out here to support you and to get in that arena anytime you need us to when you need to problem solve. Those are important things to remember. Again, having cultural respect for your community, we already talked about that. There's us in Southwest Virginia. I just love it. I mostly love the two elderly ladies having time together at a cemetery with the flowers. Those are things we smile about. Doesn't that just make you feel good? You know, there's a lot of stigma that can be attached to those pictures if you're not from Appalachia, isn't there? But when I see it, it makes me smile. It makes me feel encouraged, and it gives me hope. We want to build on past successes, and we want to engage more people to help our communities thrive. We want to talk more about Revive. We want to give Narcan out. We want to talk about mental health first aid. We want people to be more proactive and doing things on a universal prevention basis. And so results-oriented decision-making are making yourself aware that maybe a home's not safe, I'm not welcome at school, and then those kids are in jail, they have a high ACE score, they're suspended. All these things are a pattern. We want to show you a film. And let's see. Can you not click on this 3 times and it works? All right, I want you to watch this film and we'll have a discussion afterwards. It's really short. This is an amazing speaker too. I've seen her in person. She's a doll. Okay. The speakers turned up. Do we have speakers? It'll take a second. Wait a minute. That won't get bigger because it's already pasted size. Okay. I think didn't we see it on the bottom on the
even when it's uncomfortable, because I think we want to do important things. What I want you to reflect on is if you or someone you know has experienced one of the following 10 events prior to the age of being 18: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, feeling unloved or unwanted by your family, being afraid your basic needs might not get met, a divorce or separation of your caregivers, witnessing domestic violence in your home, someone with a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue in your home, someone in your home incarcerated, all prior to the age of 18. I've just defined adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, otherwise known as childhood emotional trauma. And it's a health risk that increases social problems in our community, raises our risk for disease, and can even shorten our lifespan. The Center of Disease Control names it as the prime determinant of health. And yet, unlike texting while driving or smoking cigarettes when we're young, for most of us, it's still an unknown epidemic. And yet 70% of the general population has had at least one of those events happen. That's 1,050 people in this room and about 7 people in your row. 1 out of 6 of us has had 4 or more of those events happen. And that's 240 people in this room and probably 1 or 2 people in your row. And yet we're not talking about it. Even though when it goes above a 4, some pretty hard statistics come about. At a 4, we're over 1,500% more likely to attempt suicide, over 550% more likely to become an alcoholic, COPD, liver disease, asthma. At a 6, we're more likely to die 20 years younger than our counterpart, at age 60 instead of age 80. And so we need to embrace what this silence costs us. I want to introduce you to Henry. At 18 months old, Henry moves into your community, and neighbors go to knock on his door, but they hear loud screaming and noise inside, and they look at each other and say, you know, we do crime watch and checking building maintenance, but I don't know if we're in for this. And so they walk away. At 2.5 years old, he goes to daycare, And they notice Mom has a bruise on her eye, and Henry's kind of aggressive in class. And they go, "Director, should we do something about this?" "No," she says. "We're in charge of good quality childcare, not this." And so things go on. At 5 years old, he's put upstairs in his room, and he hears a loud crash downstairs. And he comes downstairs, and Mommy's bleeding on the kitchen floor, and Dad's standing above her. 4 big police officers burst down the door. They grab Dad and put him in the police car, grab Mom, put her in the ambulance, grab Henry, and lock him in the car. A woman comes and taps on his window. She has his things in a garbage bag and says, "Come on, let's go." He drives to a new neighborhood where he knows no one. Falls asleep in a bed, not in his pajamas, crying himself to sleep. He wakes up in the morning going to a new school that he doesn't know, and the teacher yells at him because he has a hard time following the rules. And he says, "Wow, that sounds like Dad, and I don't even know where Dad is." And next, he moves from school to school, and his foster care parents get angry at him, and they start yelling at him, and begins wetting his bed at night until a new social worker comes and says, "Come on, put your things back in the garbage bag. We got to move again." And he wonders how many places he's going to have to live, where his parents are, and if he'll see them again. His behavioral health file gets this thick, and so does his school file, until one day they tell him his parents aren't his parents anymore, termination of parental rights. And so now he's up for adoption, but nobody really wants him. And so he's in his 10th foster care placement at 11 years old, and foster dad and foster mom are fighting. And he thinks, "I'm never going to watch someone put their hands on someone else again." And he steps in and he takes a swing, and the next thing he knows, he's in handcuffs and juvenile detention. Now that's a tough story to hear. And what I want you to think about is 12 systems and 50-plus people crossed Henry and his family's life, and yet no one thought it was their job to connect with them about that hard story. And that doesn't make sense to me because, right, we're caring people. All of us are. And so I wonder, maybe it's because we were taught it's not our role, it's not our place. Or maybe from a more hidden part of ourselves, we think that's Henry, that's his family. We can't change stuff like that. That's them and this is us. What I want you to hear today is this is not an us-them conversation. This is an all-of-us conversation. And if we choose to keep our story of silence, this epidemic's going to grow. And that feels uncomfortable, right? And if I'm doing this right, you feel uncomfortable because when we get uncomfortable, we grow, and that's a good thing. And you might be saying, "Allison, what do you want me to do about this? I mean, I don't know how to break this silence. I might not have the right letters behind my name. I might not have any letters behind my name. I mean, violence and abuse, that seems like pretty big stuff." And what I would say to you is this: 70% of why anyone changes a negative health behavior is because of the person who connects with them and inspires them to change that. Relationship is the evidence-based practice. Connection. And you don't need the right letters or any letters to do that. So I want to tell you about Kat. Kat had 8 of those 10 things happen before she was 19 years old. She went from residential placement about between the ages of 13 and 19, about 8 to 10. And she was the kid that broke windows and tore down doors. Sometimes she was held down in restraints and injected with Thorazine. She tells the story of a nurse who one time said, "You know what, Kat, act your age, not your shoe size. I own this place. You got to come through me to get out of here." And that's who Kat would have thought she was until she met Howard, a mental health tech who had no letters behind his name. But he understood connection, and he was willing to go past his role. And he said, "You know what, Kat? I get we need to connect." And he had to find her motivation. So he took her to the gym and said, "You know what? I want you to exercise. And if you give me 1 solid hour of really good exercise, I'll let you go back to the unit and tear everything up." And she said, "Hell yeah," right? The joke was, though, that when she walked out of that gym, she was crawling and she couldn't lift a chair to throw. Okay? And that was Howard's plan, although she didn't know that. And so Howard looked at her and he said, she began telling these chapters of her story. And he said, "You know what, Kat? I see something in you. You're going to do something important in your life." Well, Kat had never heard that before. And so she liked that. So she did what Howard didn't plan and got locked up a lot to see him. That wasn't the intention. And so she came there one day, and he said, "Kat, you coming here to see me?" And she said, "Yeah." And he said, "Here's my schedule. Meet me in the lobby." Right? We don't need to do that. So she did. That's how she got through high school. The thing is that hard stuff doesn't stop happening at 18. Kat went away to college. She was raped. She went through a serious suicide attempt, and she came back to the adult psychiatric institution, the same place where she was as a kid. Howard found out she was being admitted, and at 2 in the morning, he came to her admission and said, "Kat, please don't give up before you know what you can become. I'm going to hold hope right here till you're strong enough to grab it." Right here. That was the last time Kat attempted suicide, the last time she was locked in a residential placement, and the first job she ever had was a psych tech on a unit like Howard's because she promised to pay that connection forward. Now, we're sitting here with 2 stories, and that's the intention. For centuries, stories have taught us how to make meaning. Dr. Brene Brown teaches us that we are hardwired for connection, and that one of our deepest fears is disconnection, that fear of not belonging. And so we're sitting with a story of disconnection and connection. That gives us a choice. We can think about Henry before he threw that punch, the 12 systems that crossed his path, the 50-plus people that chose not to connect. And we can think, maybe if somebody had connected earlier, that story could have been different. And we can think about Kat, because Kat might not be who you think, because Kat's story is my story. My nickname throughout school was Alley Cat. And if Howard had not made a decision to connect with a kid like me, I truly believe I would have been in an institution, dead, or probably in jail. And so we're not powerful enough to know who's had trauma and who hasn't. We're not powerful enough to know who makes it and who doesn't. But we're powerful enough to do 2 things. 1, teach someone else about childhood trauma as a health issue. And 2, take that risk of connection. I think about if somebody came up to me and said, Allison, I saw this awesome doctor on Friday talk about childhood trauma, and they told me that I should tell someone about it. And I'm wondering if you would listen. I think I would have listened, and I think it would have made a difference. Mavis Leno once said, if you want to make a difference in the world, the next time you see someone being cruel to another human being, take it personal, because it is. And what I would add to that powerful statement is the next time someone gives you the honor of walking their trauma, their pain story in front of you, answer that call with connection. Because you see, ordinary acts of courage can change this. It's not going to be the monumental events. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
Is that not powerful? I'll tell you. It's not working. They might have turned it off back there. The reason I think that's so powerful is she mentions Brene Brown, which I love that. But it goes back to me talking about, hope you can hear, is the power of connection. Remember I told you last week that addicts often will say the opposite of addiction is connection. You can't go back, change what happened to them. You can't go through detox for them, but you can connect and you can listen to their story. I often say that, I don't know why the microphone's not working, but it's not. You can often make a difference by hearing somebody's story. I often say that a good coalition meeting is like a good recovery meeting. You make it a warm, inviting place for people to come in and tell their story. And once they tell their story and they truly feel heard, then they feel a part of the group. So sometimes it's not giving that quick pill, giving that diagnosis, let's give them the medicine, they'll be all better. It's making that connection, letting them tell their story. My neighbor, that counselor, that youth leader, Howard, she's an amazing woman. And her job and her journey and her goal in life is to share her story and give people the hope and the promise that things can be different if we just understand ACEs. If we take the time to understand ourselves and the people we love and where we work and who we deal with. It's not just about those people, it's about all of us. And the season of COVID has got us on the same page at the same time. And maybe we're all a little more willing, and maybe we all have a little more empathy for what it's like to suffer a little bit emotionally, maybe. I don't know. So I love that story, and I want you to keep that in mind. And of course, that's on YouTube under ACE if you want to watch it or refer back to it. So is this not in the PowerPoint? Interesting. So lifting all beings, it means all of us need to be lifted up, and not just when it's bad. We need to continually live in an element or an attitude of protective factors, positivity, acknowledgement, and it's that vulnerability arena connection thing that can be your base foundation for how you operate as a human service professional, or even, as a teacher. I consider them human service professionals, even though teachers go to school to teach. I think that we all have the capacity to create environments of connectivity where kids can tell their story and have a break, or see that there can be a difference in their life. And just because you grew up in a situation where there's substance abuse, mental health, or poverty, doesn't mean you have to live the rest of your life that way. But it is important to recognize the stress and trauma, the ACE score, so that you can understand where they're at in their adaptive ability. Someone's may never given them permission to change and grow. Do y'all want a 5-minute break to pee? Okay, then we'll power through this. Thank you. I saw it on your face. Do I need to cancel the recording? No, they're coming back in 5 minutes. It's not over. Taking a bathroom break for those of you over the airwaves. 5 minutes.
So I want to talk.
So I don't want to hold you all over. What time is it, by the way? Oh, good. Okay, so moving right along. Amazing witness story that lady had, and she's a great leader. Change is up to us again. We're shaped by our thoughts and our conversations, the way we relate to one another in relationships and families and communities. And telling our story and making connection with sometimes is the key to breaking the cycle. And when change happens, therapy can begin, connections can happen. It might be slow but sure, but people have the ability to change their lives and to heal, not only emotionally but physically. So I want you to check this out. This is Oprah Winfrey, and I don't know how to do that. Let's see. And I want you to listen to her. She's interviewing Brene Brown, and Brene Brown's going to talk a little bit about the epiphany that they had after some crisis that happened in our country, but just replace that with COVID, and you'll have the same moment. It's not very long. But this is Brene Brown, in case you want to know who she is. And it might take a second.
I love in the TEDx talk, I think it was a TEDx talk, where you talk about the original definition of courage. Can you share that?
Yeah.
I love that.
I do too. It's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart.
Uh-huh.
And so the original definition was to share all of yourself, share your whole story with your whole heart. So an act of courage with an act of storytelling, which I think is true. I think so many of us, I watch Super Soul Sunday, and I love when you talk a lot about the ego.
Yes.
To me, I call the ego the hustler. He's my
yeah.
hustler.
Yeah. That's a good term for it.
Yeah, he's the hustler. And the ego says to me, you have no inherent worth. You got to hustle for it, baby. How fast you going to run? How high you going to jump?
Mm-hmm.
How many likes do you have on Facebook? How many comments do you have on that post? That's the hustle.
Yeah. And isn't it, we now live in a culture that measures ourselves, by how many likes we get on Facebook.
For sure.
Yeah.
We are in, I feel like, scarcity culture. Never enough. Never good enough, thin enough, rich enough, safe enough, certain enough. And what I think is interesting is, I wanted to get your thought on this, just because you've also been looking in the faces of people for the last many years,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I started my research 6 months before 9/11. Obviously, coincidentally. We are afraid. I would say the last 12 years have been marked by a deep fear in our culture. It's like a collective post-traumatic response. Like all of a sudden.
Oh my God, I just had a big aha.
What?
I just had a big finish speaking, but
Okay.
I got that in a big way.
No.
I hope other people got it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, tell me.
No,
you
finish.
go.
No, you go. No, that was such a big aha.
Tell me. No. I think
when you just said that, I just realized that we shifted from being on alert and afraid of whether it's the orange code or the yellow code. We somehow internalize that fear, and it shows up. It shows up in the bickering and the snarkiness and that we have internalized the fear. So we're not worried about what the code alert is anymore, because we think we're safe there. We got Homeland Security looking at that. But that fear has been internalized. That's what I heard you saying.
That's it. There's a thin.
That's it. I
got
that.
I got the high five.
Yeah.
No, I think there's like a thin film of terror wrapped around us. And so if it's not, I'm not safe enough, I'm not secure enough, I'm not liked enough, I'm not promoted enough, I'm not loved enough.
I don't have enough.
I don't have enough.
I am not enough.
At the very bottom,
yeah,
I'm not enough.
Yeah. Whoa, that's big. Big, 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 big. Somebody ring some bells. We need some bells to ring on this show. But that's good.
That's it. And so guess what the number one casualty is of a scarcity culture?
What?
Vulnerability.
We shut down. Because I'm not going to let you know.
No. Because I'm already scared.
I'm not all together.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is that people are like, oh, well, we lose a little vulnerability. But vulnerability is not just about fear and grief and disappointment. It's the birthplace of everything we're hungry for.
Creativity.
Joy, creativity, faith, love.
Innovation and all of that, yes.
And the whole thing is there is no innovation and creativity without failure. Period.
So you got to be open enough to take the risk to fail.
Yeah.
So I love her because if we're holding our story in and we're not encouraged to be connected in telling our story, or no one's asking or trying to understand, we stay in that shame and that guilt and that fear. Well, now that we're in the season of COVID, we're all in some kind of collective fear, aren't we? Am I going to die? Am I going to be sick? Am I going to have enough money? Am I going to keep my job? We are blessed. Education and human service people. My son's a counselor, other two CGI, and another's a manager at Walmart. Our family has not had to face the fear of financial destruction. So couple that on top of a kid who's at home with an abusive parent and can't escape and be in school. It's just compounded during this season. So, number one, creating that arena of vulnerability. If we don't allow people to tell their story and to have the courage to be themselves and to take that challenge, then they're going to shut down forever. It's just going to compile and they're going to get sicker emotionally and physically. We're setting them up to fail. So when I talk about vulnerability, and I want you to, that was just a little teeny piece. I mean, she just gives an explanation and lays things out and explains it, has some great books. Setting that opportunity up to allow people to feel, to allow people to express, to be in that arena allows them to get rid of the shame and the guilt and to build trust. And that all happens through vulnerability. You know, we joke a lot about I'm such a procrastinator, but I don't have a fear. I've had such onstage behavior, and that's why I like the arts. Cynthia's a little more organized, detailed, so I just ramped her up this morning to have anxiety. But man, when I want to do therapy, when I want to be in a professional situation and implementing treatment, I want to be with this girl because we're such a good balance for each other. You know, she's calm, cool, collected when the chairs are flying and the kids are wild. I am too. But, you know, I also can be spontaneous and get some groove going with the group and, you know, being creative and stuff. And she's over here being this calm wave with some of the other stuff. And we're just such good partners. But that took a lot of vulnerability for us to say, let's open this cottage program. Let's deal with these kids that no one else is dealing with. And we kept saying we needed to write a book, and people beat it to us, and we lost all our money for the future. But that's okay. We're still here. But, you know, we took that chance together, and we waded through those weeds together. And we put ourselves out there, and we were very vulnerable. And every time we start over new and try to encourage people to join us, it's almost like you're trying to sell people to take the approach because it's hard. It's hard unless you've lived through it. So there's lots of opportunities for us to create vulnerable situations where people can tell their story. That goes with you all in your teachers' lounges when everybody gets back to school and has their COVID stories. COVID ironically helped me deal with my husband's stroke. I think if I had to be shut down and alone with him and watch him through his recovery, I did to some extent, but being able to go to work and be around my friends and my peers to help me process, I just kept moving, kept growing, and he's amazing. You wouldn't know he had a stroke. It's been a year now. But that was hard. So I think that you can do it at work. You can do it with your kids. You can do it with your family, teaching people to live in those valleys and opening up those situations. So vulnerability leads to connection. If you allow someone to tell their story and be themselves without judgment, without shame or guilt, just be there with them. Listen non-judgmentally, the second step in mental health first aid. That's enough sometimes. Because we don't always have to give the pill, the fix, quickly and fast. It's a process. Connection and vulnerability is where you need to start and where you need to continue your protective factor layer in every situation. Remember Al's Pals, those curriculums we got years ago? Be my friend. You know, remember all those songs? It was promoting a classroom atmosphere, not giving the teacher a quick fix, promoting that thing that kids look forward to being with each other and with the teacher. So healing to resilience. A caring adult relationship creates the trust, safety, resilience that can launch our children forward in life. They couldn't change my mom's mental illness. They couldn't take away Kat's history, but I'm going to hold hope right here. It's right here. You can get it. You can have it. And she grabbed it and she took it forward. She used her life example to keep paying it forward. Some kids don't know that's possible. They think they're doomed because their family was doomed. Or they think the whole world lives like that. I remember the first time I spent the night with somebody, I think I was in the 3rd grade. There's no yelling or screaming or freaking out, and everybody's really nice to me. Man, I want to be at that kid's house every day. And I never wanted anybody to spend the night at my house. I was 9 when I realized, oh, this is not normal. And for me, that was hard. But, everyone's story is different and just as important. So there's 7 C's of resilience. Building competence in children, giving them skills, and knowing how to communicate to them to make sure those skills solidify. Confidence, connection, building their character, a strong, powerful image of who you are and who you want to be. Kids should always have that. When I was a senior in high school, I wanted to live in an apartment with yellow walls, white wicker furniture, and I wanted a small poodle and live in the city. I didn't get it, but I got a poodle, a big standard one, and I had a yellow kitchen in the beginning. But I had a vision of who I was and who I wanted to be, and it was not someone mentally ill that couldn't write a check, drive a car, and was not very nice to her kids. I was going to be something different. And that's important, and people help to grow that. Contribution. Everyone has to learn how to give back and to be a part of a community. You're important. You're needed. Coping, living in the valleys, and control. And we're going to talk about regulation. Are you operating from this part of your brain or this part of your brain? Remember how she said in the video, kids need to understand the brain, how it's affected when you're a child, or adults do. Because sometimes, and we're going to teach you a really simple way to explain that to them, because maybe they need permission to realize, well, that's why I feel the way I do. So let's talk about breathing. Let's help them recognize when they're in that mode. Understanding trauma responsiveness is not a bunch of checklists and filling out paperwork just for the traumatized kid. It's understanding your community, understanding where they live, what are the risk factors here, what are the protective factors in our school, what protective factors do we need, what skills do I have, what skills do I lack, what's my style, what's my approach, do I need to change, do I need to grow? We all do. I'm never at a point where I know enough, ever. And neither should you be. Understanding trauma responsiveness is understanding that no one gets through life struggle-free. We all have valleys, and they're more common than the mountaintops. We're all trauma responsive. We all have a reaction. Do we know what that is? Or we just assume we have anxiety problems? Maybe you're trauma responsive. Give yourself a break and acknowledge that. There is a power in relationships, positive or negative, and we need to express that to children. Kids need to know how to identify emotions and feelings in themselves and us and others. Trauma responsiveness is being intentional in positive interactions to change a life pattern. It's not about get your work done, listen to me, write your words down. You need to understand how they are responding to you, where they've come from, what's their ACE score, what's yours. Do you have a need to control and write things down and do things in a certain? Is your interaction with people helpful or is it hurting? Or what could you do differently that might be more helpful? It's not a shame, and I always acknowledge that I'm a procrastinator, but I will also tell you I can get up and I have a lot of good skills too. We all need to recognize that about ourselves. Don't hide from it. Grow on it. Find good partners. Definition of trauma-informed approach, and Cynthia's going to start talking a little bit about this because we're going to give you some tools and things to think about. We have a few more videos as well. You're welcome.
So I can't listen to this presentation without thinking about my own family, my own daughter. Some of you know my daughter's adopted. We got her when she was 21 months old. She came to us from DSS. She had a bag of clothes. It was summertime. All the bag of clothes that she came with were long-sleeved coats, long pants. And so we basically started with nothing. We had no idea what her ACE score was. We had no idea what other traumas she may or may not have been through. We found out some later. But I can tell you the first probably 6 months of having my daughter with us, I questioned daily, what have I done? What have I done? The first week, 2 weeks actually, all she could say was no. All she could do was scream. And she banged her head. We happened to go on vacation the week after we got her, which was probably not the right decision. But we went to the beach. We took her. She would scream when we turned her toward the ocean. She would scream when we would let her down on the sand. She would scream when we were in the pool area. I mean, basically, that's all she did. So obviously, there was a lot going on. Some of you know her now, and that's not her. She's full of life. She is probably the best thing that ever happened to us.
She never made eye contact. She was not interested. Cynthia would bring her to work, and she would look at you, and she'd just walk from room to room, picking up things, doing what she wanted to do. And Cynthia sometimes had to tap her, stand in front of her, redirect her. No connection. The attachment issues were huge. I'm trying to help. Yeah, you're welcome. So I think what was interesting about Cynthia is we had been at the cottage program for a while. My son just got sick, and she was struggling with getting pregnant. She had 2 boys already and really wanted a 3rd child. So when this happened really fast, it was exciting. And then it was like we were all concerned because it was like she wasn't connecting with us. She was on survival mode. Who knows what she had suffered, but that is not the child that we see now. So it was pretty amazing, and she was lucky to have you.
So my point in talking about that is having an ACE score of 4 or more is not a death sentence. I know we've talked about, there is greater risk factors and the health concerns and those kinds of things, but I'm living proof, and she's living proof that with some of these things that we talked about, like connection, learning how to cope, having the skills to be able to do what she needs to do, there's really no difference now. Her future is just as bright as any other child that we work with. So we don't know when we're in a school with all these kids around what their trauma score is. We don't know that they might have been in foster care. We don't know that they might have drug addiction in their home. So I like to think about it as universal precautions. We have universal precautions when we're dealing with disease and things like that. So we automatically assume that every kid we work with has had some sort of trauma. Okay, so use that as a preface in things that you do. So realize the widespread impact of trauma. We've talked about that already. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in others. So we talked about fight, flight, freeze. And I want to play a video shortly that you can kind of explain to others, other kids, young people, teenagers, about what happens in the brain when trauma is happened and triggered. Respond with fully integrated policies, procedures, and practices, and actively seek to resist re-traumatization, which Lori talked about earlier.
And I think something to think about too is you're going to have peers that you work with that'll be resistant to this. They don't have time for this. When really having this understanding and this approach to begin with takes down a lot of barriers. If you're more intent on getting the curriculum across and get that work turned in and you're not recognizing this, you're setting yourself and your classroom up to fail. And so it's really important to take this time and think about your response and recognition of what's going on, and being able to explain to a child when they're when they have the ability to be calm. Start explaining some of this stuff. Start getting charts or information or things that educate them on their brain in a simple way. And the video will talk about that. It's that simple. So you're going to get resistance to people who think, I don't want to waste my time on this, but really it lifts a lot of burden and you have a lot of room to make change.
But also realizing that you yourself may have experienced trauma. We all have. 70% of people have at least one ACE score. Okay. And understanding the way you react in situations that, could be traumatizing others, so to speak. And so I'm going to play this video. Is that okay?
Talk for a minute about how to teach the brain. One of the really important things that we know in trauma is that when we help people understand the injury trauma creates in the brain and help them understand how that impacts the way they respond to other events in the world, it really helps them and their families move forward in their healing. So lots of people have given ways to teach the brain. As a practitioner myself, I've taken a lot of the models from Dr. Dan Siegel, taken models from the Hahn Foundation for teaching in the optimistic classroom, and looking at some of the things Ledoux has done, and put them together and really challenged myself and folks that I educate about practicing really teaching the brain. So when I explain this to teenagers, I start with the hand model, okay? And I start by explaining that we're going to talk about the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain that everyone has. Formally, this is called the limbic system, and this is called the cerebral cortex. But what we're going to talk is downstairs brain and upstairs brain. So in your downstairs brain, this is where fight, flight, or freeze lives, okay? When threat comes at you, your body has 3 reactions it can make. It can fight, it can run away, or it can stay very still until the danger's gone. That's what this brain does, okay? This part of the brain. What's up here, the upstairs brain, its job, among many other things, is to solve problems, to help you calm down, solve problems, okay? And to tell the downstairs brain, I got this. We're going to be okay. There's another solution. So what happens a lot of times to kids who've experienced trauma is if you think about these like muscles, because you've gone through a lot of threat, this downstairs part of the brain's been doing push-ups your whole life, okay? So this part of the brain's really strong. Part of your brain that solves problems hasn't had as much exercise because you've had to be really strong to be a survivor, a thriver. So what happens is that the brain gets what I call emotionally hijacked. This downstairs brain comes up on top of this brain, it takes over, okay? So the downstairs brain's in control. And so you fight, you run, you freeze. The only things that work when you're down here are things that calm you down. So we call them self-regulation skills. And that happens from connection. Somebody talking to you, helping you breathe, helping you feel your body calm down. Once that happens, then the upstairs brain can come back, and then you can solve problems. So that's how I try to explain to teenagers the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain, and what happens to them when they experience a threat. With young children, what I've found is they like animals. When I say young, probably 3 to 8 years old. Sometimes teenagers like it too. And so what we call this is the downstairs brain, that threat center again, is what I call the barking dog. If you think about when any noise or threat makes, usually a dog will bark. So this is the barking dog, okay? A problem solver is often called the wise owl. So upstairs is the wise owl, downstairs is the barking dog, okay? When the dog barks, the owl flies away. And so when the dog's barking, the only things they can do are maybe practice blowing bubbles, maybe practice breathing deeply, things that help the dog start calming down. And that's where you build their self-care strategies. They practice lots of different things to help the dog stop barking. The first skill being recognizing when their dog barks. Once they learn how to calm the barking dog, then the owl flies back, and then they can come up with solutions. And again, they're trying to get this muscle stronger. The problem for most people who are intervening, if you're talking to a family, most parents are going to naturally start with redirection and consequences for negative behavior. That's the first place they go. They're shaking fingers and telling somebody, stop that, you need to do this. That's an upstairs brain intervention, while most children who've experienced trauma are downstairs. So the term Siegel uses is you connect, then you redirect. The only thing that will calm a barking dog or the downstairs brain is helping that child calm down. And only then, once you teach the child to calm down, can you engage the part of the brain that solves problems and actually come up with solutions for better behavior choices. And that's why it's important to respond to the need, respond to the safety needs that get kicked up by threat, and not just react to the behavior that happens.
That's huge, isn't it? So simple. That's a skill you
Only
need to
pay for what
really
you need with Liberty Mutual.
think about, remind yourself of,
I just said that.
and be good at using, and build your arsenal of calm down skills or self-regulation skills. And then when there's a trust and a connection, you begin to develop the upstairs brain, and they know what you're doing. They'll work with you. It's amazing.
About 2 months ago, I was in my office. It was around noon, and Brooke Mullins, who I work with, and I were getting ready to go out for lunch. Okay. I get a phone call, and all I know, I look at it, it's Lori. Automatically, of course, I immediately open it because she's my boss and all that. So all I hear, fire, there's a fire, car, traffic, come. I don't know if you remember it that way. Well, I do. Okay. I'm driving down the road. No, wait, let me. So she's like, come out and come to the road, stop traffic. Okay, so immediately, where am I? Where is she? Downstairs brain, both of us. Okay, so I take off out the door. I'm running what I think is, I think I'm the Flash, but it's really probably not. So little did I know that there was a car. A person, was in the car, kind of caught on fire. And Lori wanted me and her downstairs brain, come stop traffic, okay? I was only barely past our entrance at Cumberland. I was going to lunch, and this college student, brand new car, the car was in flames and smoking. And I pulled my car over probably 30 yards down, opposite side of the road. I ran across the road, and I could tell it was going to explode. And I was trying to get him away. And in the middle of me calling them, I went, we're running away. Well, my Mini Cooper is not that old. It's sitting right there. That was dumb. What? Right. So as I'm talking to her, I'm like, stop traffic. The car's getting ready to explode. Mm-hmm. Because I knew they were behind me going to put for lunch. So in my downstairs brain, I thought, I can go out to the 4-lane and stop traffic as I'm running. Okay. It didn't quite work out that way. So in the midst of running, I think, and my upstairs brain kicks in a little bit, okay? And I call, Brooke, come out, run with me. So we go, yeah, as people from other parts of the building are going out to lunch, they're, seeing me and probably not understanding what's going on. I looked crazy. So I get to the road and there's no car. There's no fire. But I thought I could stop traffic, okay? So it wasn't logical for either of us to say, okay, Cynthia, you can go out and stand in the middle of the road to stop traffic, right? She wanted to help, and I wanted to help. Here I was. It did. And everybody was safe. It was all good. I've had a car fire, sparks, and it did happen. It was scary. But the police came and blocked it over. You're welcome. Eventually, though, I was able to kind of re-engage my thinking part of the brain and didn't walk out in traffic. I was like, I'm not sure what to do. Lori called 911. Everything turned out okay. But that's a good example of kind of how our brains work. And if you're a child and you're constantly at night worrying whether Uncle Johnny's going to come in and offend you at night, we're constantly in this part of the brain, right? When we come to school the next morning, can we re-engage that part of the brain as easily as other kids can? So I think that's just really important to think about, and that video did a great job. So trauma, individual trauma results from an event, series of events or sets of circumstance that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning, mental, physical, and social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. The ACE study helped us conceptualize what trauma is, but there's more. There could be more traumas than just the 10 sections that we talked about. So I think it's important to know that what is trauma for you might not be trauma for me. So these are the 10 sections: emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual, and so forth. Why is it important? 1 in 4 kids experience this by the age of 4. And as counselors, nurses, administrators, those kinds of things, you see that every day. But we might not know it. So key components of trauma. When a trauma happens, these are the things that we lose. So when you're a child, you may lose power and control. You can read them, but consistency, attachment, tension release, sensation and feeling. So when you look at a child, just picture maybe a difficult child that you've worked with in your career, and you look at behavior. What might be they trying to gain from that behavior?
Any of that stuff. They might be experiencing the need to have this, or because they haven't had these things, they're re-experiencing their trauma with you. And that's what we don't want to do.
And it's important that we also recognize the fact that once they tell their story and you help them process some of these things, if you're the counselor, that's the first time someone's ever told them or defined what they're feeling is, I lost control as a child. To tell a teenager, I've talked about kids who, I worked with a young girl who was in a house fire, and, did I tell this last week? She was in a house fire, and I met with her when she was 16. She was also sexually abused. But in the house fire, she was 5 years old. They lived in an old-timey house, and she actually brought me in a picture of the house, what it looked like before and then after it was gone, because her mother had pictures of that, and I asked her to bring it in. She was in a bedroom. The fire was burning. She couldn't see to get out, and she had an infant baby down the hall, and she heard the baby crying. What felt like hours, waiting. Finally, fire department came. They got her out, but the baby died. She cried. We were there to talk about sexual abuse, but this trauma of losing her brother came out. She cried. I felt out of control. Why didn't I save my brother? He was so little. Look at my house. This was the bedroom. This was whatever. And I said, boy, you were 5. You were so tiny, and you couldn't get out. It wasn't your responsibility. I'm sure it feels like that, though, doesn't it? You didn't have control, did you? It was sad. Every time she hears sirens, she has a trauma bond. She didn't have another sibling. Her mother was always sad. Well, it's because of me that you're sad. Just the weight of the world. Then when she was sexually abused, she didn't tell her mom because she didn't want to upset her mom again, because the guilt and shame, it's all my fault. Oh my gosh, just trauma after trauma after trauma. So in working with her, we talked about all these areas, and this is often what we're doing with children is normalizing and helping them to see how they feel now is related to something they went through before, and getting them to recognize their misbehavior, how they're hard on themselves, the depression, all those adaptions. Once they can calm down, if we've had them in a terrible situation, when they start coming to us, they realize we're working on this area because we've explained this to them and how that looks. So you can read through these yourself and see how all these things are necessary to grow and change, but necessary to understand, to identify. That's huge.
And as providers, if we identify that this young lady that Lori was working with was, having trouble with the loss of power and control, then we may approach it differently than we would if it's a tension release issue or just a pure behavioral problem. So understanding these is extremely important in your work to kind of identify what's going on when you see acting out behavior. Is it that they have no control at home, or
What's your noticing skills? What's their emotional feel? What are they feeling? You won't know that until you ask them. What behaviors do I see? But really, what are they thinking? And you only understand thinking and feeling through connection and vulnerability, right? And that's different developmentally for kids. You got to find a way to do that. But sometimes this discussion allows them to allow you to do that. You talk about the barking dog. You ever been around a barking dog and it wise out? If you can understand, if they know what you're doing, they might connect better. They might be willing to tell their story. And once you get that story from their perspective, man, you're on your way.
Mm-hmm. And I think intentionality is key to this. You're not responding to that behavior in a sense of you're in trouble, you're out of boundaries, whatever. You're responding to that behavior. Of course, there needs to be consequences for whatever behavior problem or loss of control and boundaries. But you're responding intentionally because you understand these. You understand, man, I wonder what's going on that kind of has led them to feel like they have lost control of themselves, or they're seeking consistency, that sort of thing. So just more on ACEs and trauma. 242% more likely to smoke. Depression, 357%. Alcoholism, 555% more likely. And again, this is not a death sentence. This is just to become aware that there are propensities to have increased health risk. The key is resiliency.
Risk factors and promoting protective factors builds resiliency, changes long-term emotional and health problems later on.
People with an ACE score of 6 or more on average have a shortened lifespan of 20 years. Again, not a death sentence. Become aware of what your ACE score is. Use universal precautions that ACE probably has happened with the kids that you work with, and has probably happened with their parents. I always, in my practice, we have parents that are difficult sometimes, but in my mind, the thing that has helped me is to say that that parent was also a child at one point. What has gone on in their life to promote some of the negative coping, and how can we help them to help that child?
No, on the situation that you're dealing with. I mean, this is just so powerful and overwhelming. But these kids that come to us each day, they don't wake up in the morning and decide, I'm going to go and throw something, or I'm going to go and cuss someone out. Something usually triggers that child to respond that way. And so many meetings that I am called upon to participate in, when you delve deep into it, it takes time, and you have to connect with that family. Sometimes I've had parents tell me in a situation that coming into a building, the mere smell are things that trigger their history as a child. I just want to thank you all. I love this.
They think it's my fault. And take that, I keep looking at Mona because I know how so many older grandparents think about the grandparent who not only had a terrible life, was a lousy parent, and their kid died from drugs or is in jail from drugs. Now their grandkid that they're responsible for is failing too. Oh. Yes. Yeah. And when I'm not, yes. Yes. But it's the worst possible solution in so many cases. Yes. They're trying to make up. Yes, ma'am. But in their minds, they feel like they failed with their own kids, and I see that all the time.
Don't we all do that, though?
Yes. Yes. Oh, yeah. I love everything that you're saying, and I hope this is an aha moment you're having, because I have them every time I do this presentation. Another layer comes off of my mind. But what's so important and significant about what you're saying is it's not a quick fix. It's not about the pill. It's not anything easy, quick. Really, it's about connection. Sometimes finding the right connection, this kid's behavior might be completely changed if you can build a connection with that parent. And that's about letting them find a way for them to tell their story. No shame, no guilt. One of the first situations where I went to a school was Lebanon High School. I had a young man. He was 6'3", big old kid. I was working with, they would call me to come do everything. I was the first kid person at Cumberland, and I go into the school. He had raised Cain. He did like his teacher, but he was angry. And the problem is every day he came to school and he slept. And if you went up to him and you're like, Jonathan, get off me. What are you? And he was so big. It was like, whoa, But he was tired. He was tired, but he was aggressive. He was belligerent. Sweet boy, really. So I'm talking to him. His mom's on the way to come in. This is a true story. And she comes in, and she's embarrassed, just tiny, feeble. He was good to his mama, too. You could tell he was ashamed, whatever, felt bad. First thing he said was, Mom, I'm sorry. I know. It's all right. I had to work. It's all right. But I could tell her qualm was she was embarrassed. Oh, my God. You're going to shame me. You're going to make me feel bad. So I did my little dog and pony show, and I'm like, hey, you know what? It's great. I partner with the school. I'm partner with the school. Mr. So-and-so, Principal so-and-so, we'll talk for a few minutes. It's okay. And, whatever. And so, I start talking to them, and this big old boy starts crying with his mama. And he just started crying. He said, Mom, I love you. I'm just so tired and whatever. Well, Mom was an addict. And Mom would go, he'd come home. He'd feel like he was safe. Sometimes he'd nod off, watch TV, way before computers and cell phones. So they couldn't check on each other. Mom would go out and date, drug, drink. She was a good mom. She tried. He would stay up until she came home to make sure she was alive. And then he would lay down on the floor by her bed because he was afraid she was going to stop breathing because she was so drunk or so intoxicated, night after night after night. Then he'd come to school and he was so wore out he was sleeping. But he was a big boy, and he was kind and sweet, great to her, but belligerent, loud, exhausted, stressed at school. Get off me! Blah, blah, blah.
So I wonder if we had not looked at his needs.
Yes.
Okay. If we had not looked at what those list of needs that we put up earlier, and let's say we sent him off to residential.
Yeah.
What
More
would
trauma?
Yeah. What would be different? So I've spent the majority of my working career working with kids that have hit, kicked, spit, pushed, used profanity. And there have been many times in my career that I have looked at Lori and said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Do they need more professional help than what I can give? I mean, And she would say to me, we are the professional help. And that's kind of what I say to you all in the community is when we send kids away, they come.
It used to be 6 months. It's 5 days now, and you stir the pot of medicine, and they get thrown back to us. And then the next step is they go to residential. What happened with this mother was Johnny goes back to class.
She's crying. I said, what can I do? What can we do differently? I'm here for you too. What you tell me is confidential. Unless you tell me you're going to kill yourself, someone else, or someone's hurting you, let's work on this. I got her into treatment. He stayed with the grandparents. She got better. I watched that young man graduate.
Yeah. So
It's connection. And it wasn't him.
he was not our client. She was. So, right. And I would challenge you all as counselors, nurses, professional people to kind of take a look at that as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes the kid is not our client. Sometimes it's the family who was a kid once, who probably dealt with some of these things that we're talking about.
Sometimes it's the probation officer. Sometimes it's the principal. Sometimes it's the teacher. Not intentionally. We recreate trauma, not intentionally. So this conversation is to wipe the playing field clean, allow us to have better conversations and better arenas, and the ability to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've talked about the impact of the brain, the synaptic density. If you think about the kids that we've talked about at the various different levels, what was going on with them brain-wise?
You have to acknowledge it because it's already solidified. You can chip away and change adaption and grow strength, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
So the harder you yell, the harder you teach, the more you try to communicate up here.
Right, instead of here.
Yeah.
So this is the brain pictures of the Romanian babies that Lori talked about earlier. Yeah, it's okay. It was good. So this is not a kid that has been, beat every day. This is neglect, not having connection, not having someone that cares or takes the time. It changes brain chemistry. So like she said, we can build coping skills and those protective factors, but we can never change brain chemistry. Again, I think this makes more sense when we're looking at it now. So what can we do? I think, like Lori said, if one person could volunteer one time a week, it would make a different world. If everybody in this room, everybody kind of listening, could have the understanding of what creates behavior sometimes and understand what need is trying to be met by those behaviors, then just think about the number of kids and families we could impact. So, resiliency happens with attachment, regulation, and competence. That's in that list of C's that we talked about before. Learning how to regulate our emotions, learning how to identify that you are in the downstairs brain. We got to do this too.
Making that connection, allowing someone to tell their story, letting them know what it is, and that they can regulate, and then they become competent. It can be that easy.
And giving kids situations that they succeed in is key to this because, if you think about, I don't know, things like losing weight. If I have success, then I'm going to be more likely to do those things. Quitting smoking. It's the same with kids. We all need positive experiences that we have that are show us that we can do it. Responding to the need rather than the behavior. Again, that list of needs. I would almost print it off, laminate it, because every kid that you work with is going to have one of those needs. Instead of asking the question, what's wrong with you, in your mind, I know you wouldn't say that out loud, what happened to create this? And what can we do to develop skills that we can move on with it? Reading the signs, reframing the behavior. And remember, when a child is acting here, it could be an out of control behavior. It could be anxiety, that fight, flight, or freeze. Where are they at down here? And recognizing how you're going to communicate. Respond to right brain behavior with right brain communication. It's going to be okay. Again, recognizing where they are, connecting, and then redirecting once you're calm, once you're able to kind of make those decisions. Some attachment strategies. I know you all have many. Call kids by their names, know who they are. Some schools have a buddy system that they pair kids who have maybe even went through difficulties and kind of came out on the other side, or kids that might have less trauma, so to speak. Pair kids with kids that you want them to behave like. Student groups, active and reflective listening. Here are some trauma-informed responses. That's downstairs brain talk. And then teaching regulation. Once you have that kid's attention, once their upstairs brain is engaged, that's when you teach. That's when you teach. You can't teach it down here. So let's talk about what happened this morning. What do you think you could have done differently? What are things that maybe you'll do in the future? And then you practice those.
Tell me what happened. Wow, really? What else? What else? What needs to be different next week so that those things are happening? Getting them to tell their story. Breathe a minute. Let's talk about it. Keep breathing. Try and get that story. Trying to build that connection.
And really, the more you know about someone's story, the more compassionate you can be also. Normalizing feelings. We do this all the time when we're working with kids in groups. Who else has ever felt that way? And what did you do? Sometimes you'll see the ADHD kid. They may be ADHD, but it could be that they're trying to regulate their body because of trauma. These are great things to use. Supporting strengths rather than focusing on deficits. If you can find that one thing that's great about that kid and build that up like it's the biggest, wonderful, most wonderful thing in the world. Be gentle, act interested, validate that their feelings are important.
That's a great acronym to remember.
It is. Trauma blocks the willingness to be vulnerable. I think that as adult people, we can all kind of relate to that. We don't want to be seen as less than, but I don't think we are less than. I think everybody, if you use the universal precautions, we all have had trauma. We all have a reaction. So understanding that maybe when a parent comes through the door and they're aggressive about their kid, maybe they're reacting.
It's the same thing about staff meetings. You have folks who are so resistant to this. You might need to recognize that there's somebody who's has some unresolved stuff themselves. You're in a staff meeting, you're trying to problem solve about little Johnny, and someone says this, because I know you've never heard this. Well, I'll tell you what, we've got 18 other kids we have to worry about. They'll think of everything except that child. Those are not necessarily diversion tactics. That's somebody who's needing to tell a story. And they're jumping to the obvious. Anybody that gets angry, sit down, get louder. Anytime we encounter a staff person, and not all our staff are good people to work with and more difficult kids. Anytime we
entertain or see those automatic responses, same thing's going on with them. So if you're in a staff meeting, so I'll tell you what, we've had her and we just do that every year. And you can, or we're not here to babysit kids. Well, tell me more about that. Encourage them to talk about that, why that bothers them. Because I'm so frustrated when trying to teach and I can't get this across and, they're not listening. Well, what else? Tell me more about that. Explain more about the situation when it's going on. When they want to say, oh, they need to get it done. I've got this stuff I need to do. We have to get SOLs. No one's listening. They have a story they need to tell. And you all need to nurture respect and empathy for each other. We take for granted that we can process all the time. And sometimes when you're autonomously alone with these kids all day long by yourself, last thing you want to do is stay an hour after school and process with your teacher friends. But sometimes you have to maybe set aside a time where you can do that once a month or once a week, or as counselors, you can lead those types of discussions. And all you're doing is trying to get teachers to tell their story. You're not trying to come up with a quick fix, new medicine, Band-Aid for that child, for the parent, refer them out, get something done. You want to get them to talk about the environment, talk about the classroom, talk about the school. Tell me more about that. When you see more people get on board and understand this process, you'll see a change. You'll see a change.
And when something doesn't work, it's not failure. It is, let's jump back on board with this team and figure out what to do next. It's part of the story. It's part of the puzzle pieces that all fit together. When one thing doesn't work, we move on to the other. So instead of this is intentional behavior, this might be lack of skill. Nobody's ever taught that kid how to act in this situation. Instead of shaming, how do we build this missing skills? How do we teach this, being intentional with that child? Instead of blaming, we're teaching. Instead of punishment or consequences, it's structure. How can we maintain the structure that that kid needs? So trauma-sensitive schools, you need to promote predictable and safe environments. Have discipline policies that really recognize that trauma and the piece that it has toward behavior. And then support your staff. Support each other. Same for classroom techniques. Activities are structured, predictable, emotionally safe, regulated, that sort of thing. And we promote positive skills for all those kids, not just the one who's maybe acting out. How do we all learn a skill? And then, of course, collaborating with mental health. There have been many times that I've gone to a school, sat in an office, and just talked, or picked up the phone and just talked. No names, no, really identifying information. What do you do, or what would you do? And whether or not we get that kid for treatment, I think it's important just to collaborate with one another.
That keeps you from reacting in fight or flight mode. Kids destroy the classroom, parents are angry. I mean, you're overwhelmed. That Band-Aid or quick fix is never going to be there. So recognizing you're in fight or flight and calling someone to process, bringing your counselor in, you can kind of help you work through that. I know that's what you all do all the time. And that's a great thing to do. Processing is perfect.
And I think many times the wheels are turning in the inside of your head and you're anxious. I felt that. You're anxious and you feel like you might lose control over this kid's behavior. Oh no, I don't know what to do. But maintaining that calm on the outside is so important. So again, is it important to discipline right away, or would it be important, could it be something that you could wait a day to talk to this kid about, maybe? Or wait an hour. Wait till they're back and engaged here instead of here. Oh, this is Paper Tigers. It's in there.
It's a trailer. It's only like a minute.
in every school in America, walking down every street in America. There are the kids that get labeled, get rid of them. They're nothing but trouble. Lincoln sits right in the heart of the most assaults, gang activity, truancy.
I did hear that it was the worst school you could ever go to.
Kids had knives, fights, absolute chaos.
He pissed me off and I threw a chair at him. And I told him I was going to kill him.
All of them were methed out.
I was invited to go to a conference about complex trauma and what stress does to the brain.
The behavior isn't the kid. The behavior is a symptom of what's going on in their life.
My mom was like, get your shit and leave. She's the only thing I had. And for her to abandon me like that.
His coping mechanism was drinking a ton, smoking a ton.
I remember one night, I didn't want to be alive.
It hit me, and it hit me really hard.
You have to unconditionally love them, and you have to believe that their behavior might be out of their control.
I love playing guitar with several of these guys. I feel like that's almost as strong as anything we ever do in class.
After that, he wasn't only a disciplined figure, he was like a friend.
Half of the student's body had over a 3-point GPA. To watch their confidence come back has been incredible.
I'm not by myself anymore. I got a team.
If I can do it, all of you can definitely do it.
It's not that I'm judging you. I know why you're smoking weed. I know why you smoke meth. I know why you're fights. You don't want to feel. I mean, that's the big challenge is I'm asking you to try feeling for a little bit because sometimes when you feel, it guides you in the direction that you should be going and not to where you are.
Where they trained their school, they recognized what trauma was, they educated kids on trauma and ACE, made it okay for them to understand what this part of the brain was, and then this was able to be done through promoting resiliency through protective factors and activities and things. And everybody had a different skill to give. Some people were better at dealing with kids emotionally, and some people were better at just the training and recognizing and give kids a second chance. And there are consequences, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. We'll let you calm down, son. Those kinds of things. So we have about 10 minutes. Self-care again is something how you treat yourself. You are inviting that's how you're inviting the world to treat you. And that goes for all of us in here too. I turned it up for you. Yeah. Self-care is not self-indulgence. Self-care is self-respect. And that's what we're teaching kids. That's what we're allowing kids to feel and to think. I think that's it. And again, the core protective factors are teaching capabilities, promoting attachment and belonging, and setting up a community culture, whether that's your school culture or where you live, your church, your home. Nurturing the healthy development of these protective systems affords the most important preparation and inoculation for overcoming potential threats and adversities in human development. Similarly, damage or destruction of these systems has dire consequences for the positive adaptive capabilities of individuals. I can't thank Melinda and your all's ability to want to be here. I hope you enjoyed it. You're learning things. I hope this creates a shift for you where you can encourage a conversation of growth in your schools, in your home, in your community. I'm going to give 5 or 10 minutes if you have questions, and then we're going to do the 5-minute revive training, and you can leave here with Narcan. Keep it in your purse, your car. So if you come up on somebody that you think is experiencing an overdose, you can save a life with a nasal spray. So any questions, thoughts, concerns? Anything you say is helpful to me, positive or negative, encouraging, discouraging, because we want to do our best when we go around. We want to connect with the folks that we're presenting to, and we want to make a difference. So I really value feedback, but I also would ask if you all have questions for us.
I'm going to look down so she don't talk to me. Did anybody have any aha moments? Raise your hand if you did. Awesome. How many of you are like, I already knew this. Thanks for coming. You reinforced what I already know. And those of you that aren't raising your hands, you didn't learn squat, you're here to check a box. Right? What did you learn, you two in the back, when you raised your hand? What could you share your aha moment?
Okay, so for me, I think my aha moment in all this was just kind of realizing things about myself that, and not only about myself, but my students too, that I really probably wouldn't have recognized had you not done this training. Because some things I think students suppress, and even myself suppress, and you don't realize that it's something completely different than what you think it is.
Do you feel a little relieved?
Yes.
Oh, I would feel relieved if they turned this microphone down. Yeah. See, I hear the same thing every time I present. The exact same comment. It's amazing.
I learn more about myself every time we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
Yeah. Believe it. We wouldn't get so emotional. What about you in the back?
About the same. I mean, I learned the things that I've experienced in my past, and now affecting the way that I parent.
Yes. Yes. And it's huge. It's big enough to where, was it a relief for you too? I got you, sister. I'm telling you. And as I said last week, it took me to have a sick kid that almost died for me to crack my nut. Because I've always wanted to help. I've always wanted to be passionate. I've always jumped in there. But I always had this fear that I wasn't good enough and I didn't know where it came from, but I didn't care. Because my on-stage behavior helped me fake it till I make it, until I was the one pushing and promoting this health approach for Sam, and I realized I was the only one on board. And if he died, it would have been my fault. And then I had to let that go. I had to surrender and have a little bit more faith. But it also manifested in anger at my husband, at all these people, And I'm like, whoa. And the only person who's never been angry and is filled with so much grace is my 23-year-old son, who's getting married in a month. And he's got a life. I never thought he'd graduate from high school. So I'm glad. It'll give you permission to let some things go, to dig deep, take care of your whole health, know what you're sensitive, and start telling your story. Because if you can tell your story, it's going to encourage somebody else to tell their story. It's not about those people. It's about all of us. Anyone else have something they learned? Any aha moments? What did you like the most about this and you would encourage us to keep doing? All of it? Was it okay? Was it what you thought it was going to be? Is there something we could do differently? Good. I was hoping someone would say that. So, could I count on you all as champions? This is just a quick checklist survey that we also have to turn in. I'm certified, and we need to get feedback and prove that we're doing these. So please answer these honestly. Would I have a commitment from you all that if we eventually could train other people in the school system, that you all would jump on board and be processors and vulnerable people in the arena to keep this conversation going, to reduce shame and blame and increase vulnerability and change? I think you'll see a cascade effect for your children. I really do. So let me give you my email and Cynthia's email if you don't have it. My email is lgatesaddison. I'm going to give you my long-term email because I'm not sure when I'm going to retire or not. lgatesaddison@gmail.com. lgatesaddison@gmail.com. Cumberland's email is lgates@cmcsb.com. But I'm also on Facebook as Lori Gates-Addison. You are more than welcome to friend me. I promote a lot of the community trainings, things that I do on my Facebook page. I'm also coordinate the media stuff for a lot of the social media we do in the region. So if you have things you want me to post or share or advertise, whether it's in your community school or whatever, share it with me and I can share it on our platforms. We have over 7,000 people on the ASAC page. And we have Mountain Movers, Cetera Coalition in Tazewell County, and lots of other community things. Cynthia's email is chale, H-A-L-E, @cmcsb.com. So you can message me on Messenger. You can connect with me through email or Cynthia. Cynthia's also on Facebook, but you can connect with us that way. And we would be happy to talk or process or spend time with you all in a helpful way. Just make sure you get up with us because we do move around. Yes. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, some of you all may have met. These are our prevention folks at Cumberland. This is Carrie Woodleaf and Dustin Keith. They're very active on our community coalitions and stuff. So what we're going to do is, are those signed? Oh, good. I'll sign these. We need to move through this pretty quick because I know they've been here a while. But what we're going to do is just kind of get you, yeah. All right, we're going to hand out a form to you. If after you fill the survey for the ACE training, if you do not want to have Narcan, you're welcome to do what you're doing next in the day. I'm not sure what that is. But if you want Narcan training, just stay for another 10 minutes. We just need you to fill out a form because this is a prescription that you're getting for free, and I need to verify that I gave it to somebody. So just fill out this form, Narcan form. Is everyone staying for the Narcan training? We'll just hand the form to you as well. So I will tell you that Narcan is good for a little over a year, then it expires. So, yeah. Yeah, so you probably don't need to do this again if you don't want to. You're fine. So don't take the sheet if you're not going to do it. I need a pen. Thank you. How many of you all remember me demonstrating the recovery position on stage where you turn someone on their side, put their hand under their head, and turn their leg? So that in case they come out of a withdrawal and if they are vomiting or something, that they don't choke on it. Keep that in mind. What is today? Oh, happy St. Patrick's Day. My goodness.
Can I do it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you did it with us. I don't think I got the one touch me.
So, would one of you all like to do it? Oh, I'm okay. Do we need to?
Yeah, they have this.
Okay, you give them that.
Yes.
I would like to do it then. I'll let you all do it.
Sure.
Right out of your hand. Are you
I'll
on
need.
that? Okay, I'm gonna stick all these.
Okay, so I'll talk while you all write. Like Lori said, I'm Dustin Keith with Cumberland Mountain Community Services Prevention. Okay.
Unless people are over the airways and can get here in the next few minutes, if you can tell me a little bit about the training, I can give you Narcan too, but you need to get here in person.
So, how many people have heard of Narcan before? I know several have had the training. Most people have heard of it. Naloxone is the name of the drug itself. Narcan is the brand name. It's been around for many years. It's used in hospitals, in emergency rooms, on ambulances. But Project Revive, which is the statewide initiative, finally said, we need to put this drug in the hands of everyday people in the community. Opioid overdoses are systemic, they're epidemic, and they've reached the point, especially in our region, that we've got to do something else. We have to take another step to prevent these overdoses from happening. So Revive will train you on how to quickly administer naloxone in an overdose situation and save a person's life. So Narcan only works on opioids, which are a type of drug that typically is used to relieve pain, but it also includes illegal drugs such as heroin. So any opioid-based medication such as Vicodin, morphine, codeine, methadone, buprenorphine, fentanyl, which is probably one of the biggest drugs of concern in our area, Narcan is going to work. So if you have any reason to suspect that someone possibly has overdosed from an opioid, if they are unconscious, if you come upon them at the grocery store, at the post office, here at school, anywhere that you come upon someone that's unconscious, that's not responsive, you could administer naloxone. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is, in this situation, is call 911. Get EMS en route to your location so that they can take over for you and get them additional help. Next thing you're going to do is check for responsiveness. Call their name, tap their shoulder. You can tug their earlobes. You can even do a sternal rub, make a fist and rub it on their chest. If they are conscious and alert, they will respond. But if not, you'll know that you need to take additional actions. So I'm also guessing most of you, if not all of you, are CPR trained as well. If they are unresponsive, then that's when you would administer the Narcan. So what we're going to give to you is the Narcan brand, which is the most common form of naloxone. It does come in several formats. This is a nasal spray that is preloaded into a dispenser. In the box, you have 2 doses of naloxone, and it's incredibly easy to dispense. On the back of your training overview is a diagram that shows you just place your middle and index finger on the top, and then your thumb on the plunger. Insert the tip of the dispenser into one nostril and deliver the full dose of Narcan in one nostril. Narcan is extremely fast acting, so if they are suffering from an opioid overdose, you should see them to become conscious or revive within 1 to 3 minutes of administration. Okay? Now, if they do not revive, either that could mean that they're overdosing from some other type of drug, or they're having some other type of medical emergency, or they have taken so much of an opioid that is extremely potent, like fentanyl or carfentanil, that they may need more Narcan. So within 5 minutes of administration, the person does not revive. You'll want to give the second dose of Narcan in the other nostril. Okay? So the way that it works is it is an opioid antagonist, which means once the Narcan gets absorbed into the body through the mucous membrane in the nose, it goes straight to the brain, and it kicks out that opioid from certain receptors in the brain. Now, the opioid does not go away. That's why it's so critical that they continue to receive care and treatment from EMS, and they need to go to the hospital. If they have a lot of opioid in their system, once the Narcan wears off in about 30 to 90 minutes, they could slip right back into an overdose state. So they do need to get checked out. Even though the revive effect is immediate and sometimes pretty significant, they do need to stay where they are. They need to be checked out by EMS. Okay. After you administer the Narcan, if the person is still not breathing, if their heart rate is still very shallow or non-existent, you can begin CPR. If you don't know CPR, you should at least do rescue breaths. So lie the person flat on their back, tilt their head back, pinch the nose, and give a 1 second rescue breath every 5 seconds until they revive or start breathing on their own. Okay. Continue rescue breaths until they start breathing, and then you'll want to do aftercare. So if they haven't revived, you'll want to put them in the recovery position, which is on their side. Fold one hand and put it behind their head, and take one leg and put it over top of the other so that they stay in that side position. If they were to throw up, they won't aspirate. Okay. Once EMS arrives, tell them what happened, give them all the details, how much Narcan you administered, and they will take it from there. Any questions about naloxone, opioid overdose, how to administer? It's very straightforward, easy to do, and it can really help save a person's life.
It's amazing. And I told you last week, a week before last, we trained someone in Tazewell. They were driving on the interstate up near Roanoke. Saw a lady and a man on the ground. They got out. He was overdosing. They got their Narcan out of the car. This was someone who had received a training at Destiny Outreach and saved that man's life. A couple things I want to point out that I know are important is when people are in an overdose, this lifts so fast from the receptor side that people come up fighting sometimes. So like Dustin said, it can happen within a minute to 3 minutes. If it doesn't feel safe, you can give the second dose. It will not kill them. It will not hurt them if they're overdosed on something else.
If they're having a heart attack, this is not going to hurt them.
It won't hurt. It's like low-dose naltrexone you can take for other things. It just lifts the medication off the receptor side. So it cannot harm people. If they do not respond in 3 minutes, go ahead and give the second half. I can't stress how important it is to call right away because he said 30 minutes to 90 minutes. I tell myself 35 to 45 minutes. And that's about how long it can take in some of these outer areas of our region for EMS to get there. So make that call before you start doing anything, or tell someone to do it. Getting back to what I said, when you administer it, and they can wake up immediately, so they're going to feel like they're in their worst withdrawal ever. So they might get up and go, "What did you just do?" Be pissed at you or whatever. Know that when they come up and they're starting to come out of it, don't be like, "Hey, it's okay, whatever." They might be real mad. So go ahead and get it, and they start stirring. I would kind of move to the other side of the room and just say, "Whoa, you were overdosing." Don't try to say too much because they're right here right now. This ain't going to be happening. Just try to stay calm and whatever. But know that they're coming out of a high, and they may feel a lot of uncomfortableness. Does that make sense? So I just tell people, because I want to be honest, don't be afraid to use it. Just back up. If you see them responding and coming out of it, you've already got them on their side. Put the nasal spray up there. Just kind of move back. Any questions? I don't want you to keep it in your car if it's 100 degrees in your car. It's okay if it's colder. I always keep mine in my purse. I do. Or right in my car. So it's good for about a year.
This particular lot expires of August 2022.
Okay, great. Nice.
So you all are now officially trained. You can come back to Cumberland. If you use your medication, please come and see us and get some more. The health department also has a supply, or any pharmacy. But of course, if you go to a pharmacy, they will bill your insurance. So you can come see us, or once it expires and you want to refresh your supply, come see us then too.
Another reason to mark in your calendar the day of your training, and I have a list. Because we do not have cards right now to get to you. So your documentation on today's training list
will allow me to go back and look to make sure you were here, so you don't have to go through this again. If you save a life and you want to replenish your stockpile, so you have 2 doses in here. Listen. Yeah, I can't thank you all enough for doing this. Thank you for giving back to your community. It's important.
Talk about the vibe.
Sure.
I can pass those.
We also have, for every Revive training that we do, we have a bag of goodies to give out to the training recipients. Our department focuses on all sorts of substance abuse and suicide prevention. As you know, the levels of opioid overdose are very severe in our region. So we're doing these Revive trainings, but we're also encouraging people to help limit the access to these sort of medications that are so harmful. So we're encouraging people to safely store all prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs. So we have locking medicine boxes that we're encouraging everyone to put their medicine in, store their medications up high, out of sight, away from children, and anyone who you think could possibly dip into your supply. Over half of all drugs that are abused come from inside the home. People sharing medications, people stealing from friends and family, and that's what we want to cut down on.
We do drug surveys every year. 54% of kids or people that took our survey say they're getting drugs from people's homes. So, don't waste this. This was an expensive grant that I wrote that we have that can get this. So if you know an elderly person that's vulnerable around people that come in and out of their house, give them this box. It's got a card on here with information. It has a lock. Also, are there doTERRA tags in here, or did we run out of those? Some of them have doTERRA bags. This also you can give to people to dissolve their medication. This is a timer cap bottle. This is great for elderly people. Once you remove the lid, it starts counting down. So if I took my pills at 10 and I take them again at 6, I know it should be how many hours later, but on here if it says, oh, this was opened an hour ago, there might be a middle school kid trying to lift one of Granny's Valiums. And we talked about Valiums and half-lives and how kids don't understand what that is, and that's setting them up to fail. Sometimes it's a talking piece. We give these out in communities and schools. We'll come back and give them out. Open houses, things like that. I want you to take a look at this book. Please keep this as counselors, as nurses. As counselors and nurses, this is Operation Parent Handbook. We actually purchase these for every 5th grade through 8th grader for all 3 counties, school shut down. So we've been giving them in our feeding lines. When we do Narcan training, when we see there's kids in the car, we've been giving these out. There's also, I don't know if there's one in here or not, we also have one for the younger kids. So these are great resources to give to families or parents. These are also expensive, so don't chuck them. If you don't want your bag given back, because this stuff is expensive, but it's worth it. I've also put a copy of our documentary about the prescription drug problem in the region. It was filmed in 2009 to 12, and it's amazing. People on here have gone on to be commissioners of health in the state of Tennessee and Virginia. Everybody on this has gone on to contribute great things in the community or are still here. And ASAC, we were bragging about almost reaching like 900 on Facebook. Now we have 7,000. So we've really come a long way and are nationally recognized for a lot of our work. But if you want to understand our story in our region and why the drug epidemic started, this is great to have. It's great to show in your classroom. And then there's also a brochure here on the ASAC Coalition if you want to know more about that. And we do these trainings all the time.
The folks that had already done it, they think theirs runs out this August.
The ones that have already done it, they got it through us, and we did it in November. Yes.
That's when we
Next November or December. Yeah, so just let me know. Okay. And you all were here so we can get more to you. Because we can only get it 100 at a time, and we're like, we have to anticipate, because we could have given it out all this week. That's why I was like stressing this morning. They did a training at Elk Garden, a line therapy, so I was like, please tell me we have it, because I told these ladies we would have it. So But we can get it back to you. So, if you want an ACE training for your church family when everybody opens back up, if you want mental health first aid, we can do it in 2 4-hour sessions. Talk about sharing the joy. Everybody got a bag? Great. Does everybody?
I think not everybody got a paper.
Okay.
The handout.